The letter that would destroy everything I believed about my life was written in my grandmother's careful script, hidden behind her vanity mirror for 53 years like a time bomb waiting to explode my world. I discovered it on a rain-soaked Thursday afternoon while cleaning out her house, 3 weeks after we'd buried Rose Eleanor Whitmore in the family plot beside my grandfather. The antique mirror had fallen as I was packing her bedroom furniture, and when I knelt to assess the damage, I saw a yellowed envelope taped to the back with the kind of precision my grandmother applied to everything from her perfect pie crusts to her immaculate garden rose. My name was written across the front in her familiar handwriting, for Sophia when the time comes to know the truth. The house felt suddenly colder as I held that envelope, rain drumming against the windows like fingers tapping out a nervous rhythm. Grandmother. Rose's bedroom still smelled of her lavender sachets and the vanilla candles she'd burned every evening while reading her romance novels. Her reading glasses lay folded on the nightstand next to a half-finished crossword puzzle, as if she'd just stepped out for tea and would return any moment to scold me for snooping through her things. I'd been dreading this task for weeks, sorting through 87 years of accumulated memories, deciding what to keep and what to donate to charity. Rose had been the anchor of our family, the keeper of traditions and secrets, the woman who made Sunday dinners mandatory and Christmas mornings magical. She'd raised me after my father died when I was 12, stepping in when my mother Margaret couldn't cope with single parenthood and her grief. The envelope was heavier than it should have been, containing what felt like multiple pages and something small and metallic. My hands trembled as I broke the seal that had remained intact for more than 5 decades. Inside were 3 items that would shatter my understanding of everything. A handwritten letter, a birth certificate I'd never seen before, and a hospital bracelet with a name that wasn't mine. The letter began simply enough. My dearest Sophia, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and the time has come for you to learn what I swore I would take to my grave. But it was the next line that made my blood turn to ice water in my veins. Your real mother is not who you think she is. I had to read it 3 times before the words registered, my brain refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. Margaret had given birth to me. I had her baby pictures, her birth certificate listing me as her daughter. 28 years of shared memories and inside jokes and mother-daughter moments that formed the foundation of who I was. The letter continued in my grandmother's steady hand. Margaret is not your biological mother, though she has loved you as fiercely as any mother could. Your real mother was my daughter too, but not the one you know. The truth about your birth has been buried for 28 years, and I pray you will forgive me for the deception we felt necessary to protect you. The birth certificate was dated 28 years ago, my supposed birthday, but listed a different mother entirely, Elena Rose Whitmore. I never heard that name in my life. The hospital bracelet bore the same unfamiliar name, and as I held it up to the lamplight, I could see it was sized for an infant. My legs gave out, and I sank onto my grandmother's floral bedspread, the documents scattered around me like evidence at a crime scene. Elena Rose Whitmore. The middle name was clearly in honor of my grandmother, but who was Elena? Margaret was Rose's only daughter, or so I'd believed my entire life. The rain was coming down harder now, creating rivulets on the windows that blurred the outside world into abstract shapes. Everything felt surreal, as if I'd stepped through Alice's looking glass into a reality where nothing was as it seemed. I thought about every family gathering, every holiday dinner, every casual conversation about family history. Had they all been lies? Had everyone I trusted been part of some elaborate deception? I picked up the letter again, my hands shaking so violently I could barely hold it steady. There was more. Elena was beautiful and wild and made choices that broke our hearts. When you were born, circumstances forced us to make an impossible decision. Margaret had lost her baby 3 days before you arrived, a stillbirth that nearly destroyed her. When Elena could no longer care for you, it seemed like fate. Margaret needed a child to heal her broken heart, and you needed a mother who could give you the stable, loving home Elena couldn't provide. The room spun around me as the implications hit like physical blows. Margaret had lost a baby. I was Elena's child. The woman I'd called mother for 28 years had been grieving her own loss while taking on someone else's child. And Elena, where was she? What had happened to my real mother? I grabbed my phone with trembling fingers and dialed Margaret's number. my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might burst. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm with the affection that had been my constant companion throughout my life. Sophia, honey. Perfect timing. I was just thinking about you. How's the cleanup going at Grandma's house? Mom, I said, and my voice cracked on the word that suddenly felt foreign in my mouth. I need to see you. Right now. I found something. There was a pause, and when she spoke again, her voice had changed, become cautious, wary. What kind of something? A letter from grandmother. About Elena. The silence that followed was so complete I thought the call had dropped. Then I heard something that chilled me to the bone, a sharp intake of breath that sounded like recognition, like fear, like the sound of someone's worst nightmare finally coming to pass. Don't go anywhere, she whispered. I'm coming to get you. Margaret arrived at Grandmother Rose's house in record time, her sedan skidding slightly on the wet gravel driveway as she parked with uncharacteristic recklessness. Through the kitchen window, I watched her sit in the car for several long minutes, gripping the steering wheel as if it were the only thing keeping her anchored to reality. When she finally emerged, she moved like a woman walking to her own execution, her usual confident stride replaced by hesitant, fearful steps. I met her at the front door, the letter clutched in my hand like evidence in a trial where I was simultaneously the prosecutor, defendant, and jury. The woman who had been my mother for 28 years looked smaller somehow, aged by the 30 minutes it had taken her to drive from her house to this moment of reckoning. Her auburn hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared from what I now realized had been tears, and her green eyes I'd never inherited, I now understood were red-rimmed with panic. Sophia, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Please, let me explain. Explain what? I held up the letter, watching her face crumple as she recognized my grandmother's handwriting. Explain how you've lied to me for my entire life. Explain who Elena is. Explain why I have a birth certificate with a name I've never heard before. She stepped into the house, her movements careful and deliberate, as if the wrong gesture might shatter what remained of our relationship. The living room where I spent countless hours as a child playing board games with Rose, listening to stories about our family history, suddenly felt like a courtroom where truths long buried were finally being exhumed. I want to tell you, Margaret said, settling onto the edge of Rose's favorite armchair as if she didn't quite dare to make herself comfortable. God, Sophia, I've wanted to tell you every day for 28 years. But Rose made me promise, and then as you got older, it became harder and harder to find the right words, the right time. Who is Elena? I demanded, my voice rising with each word. Who is my real mother? And why have I never heard her name mentioned once in my entire life? Margaret closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, they were filled with a pain so deep it seemed to have its own gravity. Elena was Rose's eldest daughter. My older sister. The words hit me like a physical blow. Margaret had a sister. I had an aunt I'd never known existed. The family tree I'd memorized, the genealogy project I'd done in 7th grade, the countless conversations about relatives, all of it built on lies and omissions. Your sister? I sank onto the couch, my legs suddenly unable to support me. How is that possible? Grandmother never mentioned. Because Elena broke Rose's heart, Margaret said, her voice thick with emotion that had been suppressed for decades. She was complicated, brilliant and beautiful and wild in ways that our small town couldn't understand or forgive. She left home when she was 17, ran away to the city with dreams of becoming an actress. Rose was devastated. For years we heard nothing, no letters, no phone calls, no word whether she was alive or dead. I thought about all the family photos I'd studied over the years, looking for clues about my resemblance to relatives. There had always been a gap I couldn't explain. I looked nothing like Margaret, nothing like Rose, nothing like my deceased grandfather. My dark hair and brown eyes, my height, my facial structure, none of it fit with the Whitmore family genetics I'd grown up knowing. Then what? I pressed, though part of me was terrified to hear the answer. What happened to her? Margaret stood and walked to the window, staring out at the rain as if she could see into the past. She came back when you were born, showed up at Rose's door in the middle of the night, 8 months pregnant and scared out of her mind. She'd been living rough for years, bad relationships, worse choices, struggling with problems that she couldn't overcome on her own. What kind of problems? Drugs, mostly, alcohol. Elena had demons that she'd been fighting since she was a teenager, and by the time she came home they were winning. Margaret's voice was barely audible now, each word seeming to cost her something precious. She stayed just long enough to give birth to you, and then ... then what? My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. She left again. 3 days after you were born, she was gone. Left a note saying she wasn't fit to be anyone's mother, that you deserved better than what she could give you. Margaret turned from the window, tears streaming down her face, and I had just lost my own baby. A son. He was stillborn 3 days before Elena showed up with you. The pieces were falling into place with devastating clarity. So you took me in. I took you in and loved you from the moment I held you, Margaret said fiercely. You weren't a replacement for the child I lost, Sophia. You were a gift. You were my daughter in every way that mattered, even if we didn't share DNA. But there was something she wasn't telling me. I could see it in the way her eyes darted away from mine, the way her hands twisted together nervously. 28 years of knowing this woman told me she was still hiding something. What else? I asked quietly. What else aren't you telling me? Margaret's face went pale, and she sat down heavily as if her legs could no longer support her. The father, she whispered. Your biological father. What about him? She looked up at me with eyes full of shame and secrets that ran deeper than I'd imagined possible. Elena never told us his name, but there was something about the timing, about when she came back, about why she was so scared, ... double quotes, Mom. The word still felt strange in my mouth, but it was the only one I had. What are you trying to tell me? Margaret took a shuddering breath and spoke the words that would turn my world upside down once again. We think your father might be someone who's been in your life all along. The words hung in the air between. Yes, like smoke from a fire that would consume everything I thought I knew about my identity. I stared at Margaret, at the woman who had raised me but wasn't my mother, trying to process what she'd just revealed. My biological father was someone who'd been in my life all along. The implications were staggering, horrifying, impossible to contemplate. What do you mean? I whispered, though part of me already suspected. I didn't want to know the answer. Who do you think is my father? Margaret's hands shook as she reached into her purse and pulled out a photograph I'd never seen before, yellowed with age and carefully preserved in a plastic sleeve. The image showed a young woman with my exact features standing next to a man whose face had been deliberately obscured, scratched out with black ink as if someone had tried to erase him from existence. This is Elena, Margaret said, her voice hollow with years of suppressed pain. Taken about 9 months before you were born. Rose found this hidden in Elena's old room after she left for the second time. I took the photograph with trembling hands, studying the woman who had given birth to me. Elena looked exactly like I did now, the same dark hair, the same brown eyes, the same delicate bone structure that had never made sense in the context of the Whitmore family genetics. But it was her expression that haunted me most, a mixture of joy and terror. As if she were thrilled to be photographed with this man, but simultaneously afraid of something. Why is his face scratched out? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect the answer. Because Rose recognized him, Margaret said quietly, and the recognition nearly destroyed our family. The rain continued its relentless drumming against the windows, creating a cocoon of sound that seemed to isolate us from the outside world. I felt as if I were drowning in revelations, each new piece of information pulling me deeper into a mystery that kept expanding like ripples from a stone thrown into still water. Who was he? But even as I asked the question, pieces were falling into place in my mind with sickening clarity. Elena's fear, her decision to leave, the family's collective silence about her existence, the way certain relatives had always looked at me with expressions I couldn't quite decipher. Margaret stood and walked to the mantelpiece where Rose had displayed family photographs for decades. She picked up a framed picture from my high school graduation, an image of me standing between her and my Uncle James, Rose's brother who had always been like a grandfather to me. Uncle James, with his kind eyes and gentle manner, who had taught me to fish and helped with my college applications and walked me down the aisle at my wedding last year. No, I breathed, understanding flooding through me like ice water. No, that's impossible. James was married to your Aunt Carol then, Margaret said, her voice barely audible. They were having problems, had been for years. Carol couldn't have children, and it was tearing their marriage apart. Elena was 17, rebellious, angry at the world. James was 35 and lonely, and made a terrible mistake. The photograph fluttered from my numb fingers to the floor. Uncle James, the man who had been a constant presence in my life, who had bounced me on his knee as a child, who had given me away at my wedding just last year with tears in his eyes. The man I had loved and trusted as a second father was actually my biological father. Rose knew? I managed to ask through the nausea that was rising in my throat. Rose figured it out when Elena came back pregnant. The timing, Elena's refusal to name the father, the way James couldn't look at any of us for months afterward. Margaret's voice was thick with decades of pain and secrecy. Carol never knew, still doesn't know. James confessed everything to Rose, begged her forgiveness, swore it would never happen again. I thought about every family gathering, every Christmas dinner, every birthday party where Uncle James had been present. Had he known? When he looked at me, did he see his own features reflected back at him? When he hugged me goodbye, was he embracing his daughter while pretending I was just his niece? Does he know I'm his daughter? Margaret nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. Rose told him after Elena left. She said he had a right to know, but she made him swear never to acknowledge it. For Carol's sake, for the family's sake, for your sake. The secret was destroying all of us, but the truth would have been even more devastating. The room spun around me as the full scope of the deception became clear. Not just Margaret pretending to be my mother, not just Elena's existence being erased from family history, but Uncle James living with the knowledge that his own daughter called him uncle and had no idea of their true relationship. My wedding, I whispered, remembering how emotional he'd been that day, how he'd held my hand just a little too long as he placed it in my husband's. When he walked me down the aisle, he was giving away his daughter. Margaret finished quietly. The only time he ever got to act as your father, even if no one else knew it. I bent over, gasping for air, as the weight of all these revelations crashed down on me. Everything I had believed about my family, my identity, my place in the world had been a carefully constructed lie. The people I loved most had been keeping secrets that went to the very core of who I was. Why tell me now? I asked when I could finally speak. Why did Rose leave that letter? Margaret wiped her eyes and looked at me with a mixture of love and regret that had been building for 28 years. Because she was dying, and secrets that heavy shouldn't be buried with the people who carry them. Because you deserve to know the truth about where you came from. And because ... double quotes, she paused, as if gathering courage for one final revelation. Because Elena is still alive, Sophia. And she's been trying to find you. The words, Elena is still alive, echoed in my mind like a mantra I couldn't escape as I drove home through the rain. My windshield wipers beating a frantic rhythm that matched my heartbeat. Margaret had given me everything she knew, addresses from decades past, names of people who might have stayed in contact with Elena, fragments of a life that had been deliberately erased from our family's history. My house felt like a sanctuary when I finally pulled into the driveway, but even familiar surroundings couldn't calm the chaos in my mind. My husband David was working late at the law firm again, which meant I had hours to process what I learned before trying to explain the inexplicable to him. How do you tell someone that your entire identity has been a lie, that the uncle who'd walked you down the aisle was actually your father, that your real mother was alive somewhere and had been searching for you? I spread Margaret's documents across our dining room table like pieces of a puzzle I wasn't sure I wanted to solve. There were addresses in Chicago, Detroit, and Seattle, cities where Elena had been spotted over the years, according to the private investigator Rose had secretly hired in the 1990s. Credit card receipts and employment records that painted a picture of a woman constantly moving, never staying in one place long enough to put down roots. But the most disturbing item was a series of letters, unopened envelopes addressed to me in various handwritings, all returned to sender with stamps marked addressee unknown or moved. No forwarding address. Elena had been trying to contact me for years, but Rose had been moving and changing our address information to keep her away. The oldest letter was dated 15 years ago, when I was 13. My hands shook as I opened it, wondering what my biological mother had wanted to tell her teenage daughter. My dearest Sophia, it began in handwriting that looked like my own. I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I had to try. Today is your 13th birthday, and I've been thinking about you every day for 13 years. I know I made terrible choices that hurt everyone, especially you. I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness or to try to be part of your life now, but I want you to know that giving you up was the hardest thing I've ever done, and not a day goes by that I don't wonder who you've become. I had to stop reading. The pain in those words was so raw, so genuine, that it cut through my anger about the deception and reached something deeper, a longing I hadn't even known existed for the mother who had given me life. But there were more letters, growing increasingly desperate over the years. Elena describing her struggles with addiction, her attempts at rehabilitation, her slow climb toward sobriety. She wrote about jobs she'd held waitressing, house cleaning, eventually working her way up to managing a small nonprofit organization for women in crisis. The progression painted a picture of someone fighting to become worthy of reconnection with the daughter she'd abandoned. The most recent letter was dated just 6 months ago. Sophia, I know Rose is sick. I've been watching from a distance, checking obituaries and public records. When she passes, the truth might finally come out. I've been clean for 7 years now. I have a small apartment in Portland, a steady job, a life that might not embarrass you. I don't expect you to want a relationship with me, but I hope you'll at least let me explain why I made the choices I did. I love you more than you'll ever know. She'd included a phone number and an address in Portland, Oregon. My biological mother was less than 3 hours away by plane, living a life I knew nothing about while I'd been raised by the sister who'd stepped in to fill the void Elena had left behind. I picked up my phone 3 times to call the number before finally dialing. It rang 4 times before a voice I didn't recognize, but somehow knew answered, a voice that sounded like mine but weathered by years of pain and struggle. Hello? Is this Elena Whitmore? My voice came out as barely a whisper. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. Then, Sophia? Oh my God, is this really Sophia? Yes, I said, and started crying before I could stop myself. It's me. I found the letter. I know everything. I'm so sorry, Elena said, and I could hear tears in her voice too. I'm so sorry for everything, for leaving you, for the pain I caused, for the choices that. I want to meet you, I interrupted, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. I need to understand. I need to hear your side of the story. Are you sure? I know this must be overwhelming, and I don't want to make things worse for you or for Margaret. She's been a better mother to you than I ever could have been. But I was already looking up flights to Portland on my laptop. The need to see her face, to hear her story firsthand, had become an obsession that couldn't be delayed. I'm flying out tomorrow, I said. Can you meet me? Yes, Elena whispered. Yes, of course. Sophia, there's so much I need to tell you. So much about why I really left, about what I was running from. The things Margaret told you, they're true but not complete. There are parts of the story that even Rose didn't know. Secrets that I've been carrying alone for 28 years. A chill ran down my spine. What kind of secrets? The kind that would have destroyed more than just our family, Elena said quietly. The kind that explained why I had to stay away, even when it broke my heart to do it. I couldn't sleep that night, so I drove back to Rose's house at dawn, determined to search every inch for more hidden documents before my flight to Portland. The morning light filtering through the old lace curtains revealed details I'd missed in yesterday's emotional chaos, subtle inconsistencies that now took on sinister meaning. Family photographs where someone had been carefully cut out. Yearbooks from Rose's high school years with pages missing. A jewelry box with a secret compartment that contained items I'd never seen before. The basement was where I struck gold. Behind Rose's ancient washing machine, I found a cardboard box marked winter decorations in her careful handwriting, but instead of Christmas ornaments, it contained decades of correspondence, legal documents, and newspaper clippings that painted a picture far more complex than what Margaret had revealed. The first shock was a birth certificate not mine, but one for a baby boy named Michael James Whitmore, born 3 days before me to Margaret and her then husband Robert. The baby I'd been told was stillborn had actually lived for 3 days. There were hospital records detailing his brief life, his struggle with respiratory complications, and ultimately his death from complications related to premature birth. But it was the next document that made my hands shake. A police report dated just 2 weeks before my birth, filed by Elena Whitmore. She'd been seeking a restraining order against someone whose name had been blacked out with permanent marker. The visible portions described threatening behavior, unwanted contact, and fear for personal safety. Someone had been stalking Elena, someone dangerous enough that she'd involved the police, someone whose identity was important enough that Rose had felt the need to redact it, even in documents hidden in her own basement. I photographed everything with my phone, my hands trembling as each new piece of evidence revealed layers of deception I hadn't imagined. There were private investigator reports from the early 2000s tracking Elena's movements across multiple states. But these weren't just about keeping tabs on a wayward daughter, they read like security assessments, as if Rose had been worried about Elena's safety rather than simply curious about her whereabouts. The most disturbing discovery was a series of letters addressed to Rose herself, all from the same sender whose name had been carefully redacted throughout the collection. But whoever had done the redacting had missed one crucial detail, an envelope postmarked just 6 months ago with a return address that made my blood run cold. The return address belonged to the law firm where my husband David worked. I sank onto Rose's basement floor, surrounded by documents that were rewriting everything I thought I knew about my family's secrets. Someone at Davis' firm had been corresponding with Rose about Elena, someone who had access to legal resources and private investigators, someone who had reasons for wanting Elena's location to remain secret. My phone rang, startling me out of my growing panic. Elena's number appeared on the screen, and I answered immediately. "Sophia, I'm so glad you called last night," Elena said, her voice tight with anxiety I hadn't noticed during our initial conversation. "But I need to ask you something important before you come to Portland. Have you told anyone else about finding the letter? About planning to meet me?" "Just Margaret," I said, then paused. "And my husband David will know when I don't come home tonight." "Why?" The silence that followed was so loaded with fear that I could feel it through the phone line. "What's your husband's last name, Sophia?" "Morrison. David Morrison. He's a lawyer here in town." "Elena, what's wrong? You sound terrified." "Oh God," Elena whispered. "Oh God, Sophia, don't get on that plane. Don't come to Portland. Don't tell David where you're going. What are you talking about? You're scaring me." "Morrison," Elena repeated, her voice breaking. "Is he tall, dark hair, scar on his left hand from a childhood accident?" My heart stopped. David did have a scar on his left hand from falling off his bike when he was 8. It was one of those intimate details that only someone close to him would know. "How do you know about his scar?" "Because David Morrison is the reason I ran away 28 years ago," Elena said, her words coming fast and desperate. "He's the one who was stalking me. He's the one I was afraid of." And Sophia ... "I think he's the one who's been monitoring my attempts to contact you all these years." The basement suddenly felt like a tomb, the weight of the house above pressing down on me as Elena's words shattered my understanding of reality once again. My husband, the man I'd married less than a year ago, the man who'd seemed like the perfect partner after years of failed relationships, had been hunting my biological mother for decades. "That's impossible," I whispered, but even as I said it, pieces were falling into place with horrifying clarity. Davis' job at the law firm, his access to private investigators and background check services, his family's long history in our small town, his knowledge of everyone's business going back generations. The way he'd seemed almost too interested in my family history, always asking questions about relatives and encouraging me to explore my genealogy. "Sophia, listen to me carefully," Elena said urgently. "David Morrison was obsessed with me in high school. When I came back pregnant, he somehow found out I was in town. He started following me, showing up at Rose's house, threatening to tell his wife about our past relationship if I didn't see him. I was scared out of my mind, not just for myself but for you." "You had a relationship with David?" The question came out as a whisper. "We dated briefly when we were teenagers, but he never got over it. Even after he married, even after I left town, he kept trying to find me." "The restraining order was against him, Sophia." "I ran away because I was afraid of what he might do if he found out about you." The phone slipped from my nerveless fingers as the final most horrible piece of the puzzle clicked into place. David hadn't just been stalking Elena, he'd been waiting for her to lead him to me. Our entire relationship, our courtship, our marriage, it had all been part of a 28-year plan to get close to Elena's daughter, Sophia? Elena's voice was tiny and distant through the phone's speaker. Sophia, are you there? I picked up the phone with shaking hands. Elena, I whispered. I think David might be my father. The words hung in the air like a death sentence as Elena's sharp intake of breath confirmed my worst fears. Through the phone, I could hear her moving around what sounded like an apartment. The rustling of papers and the sound of drawers being opened and closed with desperate urgency. I was afraid you'd figure that out, Elena whispered. Sophia, you need to listen to me very carefully. Pack a bag right now and leave town. Don't go home to David. Don't tell anyone where you're going. Just disappear for a few days until I can figure out what to do. He's my father and my husband, I said, the words feeling like poison in my mouth. The magnitude of the horror was too vast to process all at once. I'd married my own father, a man who had been orchestrating this reunion for decades. Elena, what kind of sick person does that? What kind of man spends 30 years tracking down his own child just to... A very dangerous one, Elena interrupted. Sophia, there are things about David that even I didn't fully understand back then. Things I've learned over the years that made me realize how lucky I was to get away from him. I climbed the basement stairs on shaking legs, clutching the phone like a lifeline while my world continued to collapse around me. The house that had been my grandmother's sanctuary now felt like a trap, every shadow potentially hiding someone who had been watching me my entire life. What things? What did you learn? After I left town, I started researching obsessive behavior, trying to understand what had driven David to such extremes. I found out about other women he dated in college, women he worked with at the law firm. There was a pattern, Sophia. Women who looked like me, women who reminded him of our high school relationship. I made it to the living room and peered through the curtains, half expecting to see David's car in the driveway, despite knowing he was supposed to be at work. The street was empty, but that didn't make me feel any safer. What happened to them? Some of them just disappeared, moved away suddenly without telling friends or family where they were going. One of them, a paralegal named Jennifer, was found dead in her apartment, apparent suicide, according to the police report. But her sister never believed it. She hired a private investigator who found evidence that someone had been stalking Jennifer for months before her death. The room started spinning as the full scope of David's obsession became clear. He hadn't just been fixated on Elena, he'd been recreating their relationship with substitute women for decades. And when they couldn't fill the void she'd left, he'd eliminated them from his life in the most permanent way possible. My God, I breathed. How many women? I don't know for certain, but over the years I've tracked at least 5 suspicious deaths or disappearances connected to David Morrison. The private investigator I hired to look into it thinks there might be more. I thought about our wedding day. How insistent David had been about having Uncle James walk me down the aisle instead of Margaret. At the time, I thought it was sweet that he wanted to honor my relationship with my uncle. Now I understood the sick symbolism he'd arranged for my biological father to give me away to my other biological father, completing some twisted fantasy he'd been nurturing for decades. There's something else, Elena continued, her voice growing more urgent. The reason I was so scared when you told me your husband's name. 3 months ago, someone broke into my apartment in Portland. Nothing was stolen, but they'd gone through all my papers, my photo albums, everything related to you. The police said it looked like someone had been searching for specific information. David was in Portland 3 months ago. I whispered, remembering his business trip that had stretched longer than expected. He said there were complications with a case, that he had to stay an extra few days. He found me, Sophia. I don't know how, but he found me. I've been planning to disappear again, to start over somewhere new, but when Rose died, and I thought you might finally learn the truth, I couldn't leave without trying to warn you. I heard a car in the driveway and froze, phone pressed to my ear as footsteps approached the front door. David's voice called out, warm and concerned in the way that had fooled me for over a year of marriage. Sophia, honey, are you in there? Margaret called and said you'd been upset about something you found in Rose's house. He's here, I whispered to Elena, my voice barely audible. Hide, Elena hissed. Don't let him know you figured it out. Play along until you can get away safely. The The front door opened. David had a key, of course, because Rose had given one to her honorary grandson years ago. Another piece of his long-term strategy falling into place. Sophia? His voice was closer now, moving through the house with the confidence of someone who belonged there. I was worried when you didn't come home last night. I ended the call and slipped the phone into my pocket, my mind racing for a plausible explanation for my presence here at dawn, surrounded by evidence of secrets that could get me killed. I'm in here, I called, trying to keep my voice steady as David appeared in the living room doorway. He looked exactly like the man I'd fallen in love with, handsome, concerned, devoted, but now I could see something else in his eyes, something predatory and possessive that had been there all along, hidden behind the mask of the perfect husband. You look terrible, sweetheart, he said, crossing the room to embrace me. Margaret said you found some old letters? Family history can be overwhelming when you're dealing with grief. I forced myself to relax into his arms, even as every instinct screamed at me to run. Just some correspondence between Rose and Elena, I said carefully. Nothing important. I was just curious about the sister I'd never heard of, but as David held me, I felt something that chilled me to the bone, his hand moving to my pocket where I'd hidden my phone, checking to see if I'd been making calls. The hunt was just beginning. David's hand lingered on my pocket for just a moment too long before he pulled back to study my face with those blue eyes that had once seemed so loving and now appeared calculating, predatory. I forced myself to maintain eye contact while my skin crawled at his touch, knowing that my life might depend on convincing him that I suspected nothing. Elena must have been before my time, David said casually, but I caught the slight tension in his voice, the way his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Rose never mentioned having another daughter. What did the letters say about her? Not much, I lied, gathering the scattered documents with hands that I willed to remain steady. Just that she moved away when she was young and they lost touch. Rose seemed sad about it, like she regretted not trying harder to maintain contact. David helped me collect the papers, his fingers brushing mine in what anyone else would have interpreted as a loving gesture. But I noticed how carefully he examined each document, his lawyer's mind cataloging every piece of evidence that might contradict the narrative he'd spent decades constructing. Well, families are complicated, he said, taking the box from my hands. Sometimes it's better to let sleeping dogs lie, don't you think? Rose probably had good reasons for not talking about Elena. The casual way he said her name sent ice through my veins. He was testing me, seeing if I would react to hearing my biological mother's name from his lips. I managed a non-committal nod while mentally calculating the distance to the front door and wondering if I could outrun him. You're probably right, I said. I should get home anyway. I have a lot to catch up on after spending so much time here. Actually, David said, his hand settling on my lower back in a gesture that felt more like restraint than affection. I think we should stay and finish going through Rose's things together. I took the day off to help you, and there's no telling what other family surprises might be hiding in this old house. The suggestion sounded reasonable on the surface, but I understood the threat beneath it. He wasn't going to let me out of his sight until he was certain I hadn't learned anything dangerous. My phone felt heavy in my pocket, Elena's warnings echoing in my mind as David guided me toward the stairs with gentle pressure that I knew could become violent in an instant. That's sweet of you, I managed, but I'm really tired. Maybe we could come back tomorrow when I'm thinking more clearly. Nonsense, David said, his smile never wavering even as his grip on my arm tightened. You know how I feel about procrastination. Better to get unpleasant tasks finished quickly. We spent the next 3 hours going through Rose's belongings with David maintaining his helpful husband persona while systematically confiscating anything that might contain family secrets. He was subtle about his slipping documents into his briefcase, pocketing photographs that showed too much, redirecting my attention whenever I lingered too long on something potentially revealing. But it was when we reached Rose's bedroom that his mask finally slipped. Hidden behind her dresser, I found another envelope marked with my name in Rose's handwriting. As I reached for it, David's hand clamped down on my wrist with bruising force. I think you've had enough family revelations for one day, he said. And for the first time since I'd known him, his voice carried no warmth at all. Some secrets are better left buried with the people who kept them. I looked up into his face and saw a stranger cold, calculating, dangerous. The man I married was gone. replaced by someone who had been playing a role for so long that I wondered if the David I'd fallen in love with had ever existed at all. "You're hurting me," I said quietly. He released my wrist immediately, the concerned husband mask sliding back into place so smoothly, it was almost convincing. "Sorry, sweetheart. I just don't want you to upset yourself any more than you already have. Grief can make us do irrational things, but I've seen the truth beneath the facade, and I knew with absolute certainty that Elena had been right about everything. David Morrison was a predator who had been stalking my family for decades, manipulating events from behind the scenes, waiting for the perfect moment to claim his prize. I palmed the envelope while pretending to steady myself against the dresser, slipping it into the waistband of my jeans where David's watchful eyes couldn't follow. Whatever Rose had wanted to tell me was important enough that she'd hidden it separately from the other documents, and I had a feeling it contained the final pieces of a puzzle that would explain 30 years of secrets and lies. "You're right," I said, forcing my voice to sound defeated and tired. "I think I need to go home and process all of this. It's been overwhelming." David studied my face for a long moment, and I could see him weighing whether to trust my performance. Finally, he nodded and offered me his arm with the gallant gesture that had once charmed me. "Of course, darling. Let's get you home where you can rest." But as we walked toward the door, I caught him glancing back at Rose's bedroom with an expression that promised he would return to search for whatever I might have missed. The hunt was escalating, and I was running out of time to stay ahead of a predator who had been perfecting his game for longer than I'd been alive. I waited until David left for work the next morning before locking myself in our bathroom and reading the final envelope Rose had hidden in her bedroom. My hands shook as I broke the seal, knowing that whatever was inside would either damn me or save me, and possibly both. The letter was brief, written in Rose's increasingly frail handwriting that suggested she'd penned it in her final days. "Sophia, if you're reading this, then you've learned about Elena and David, and you're in terrible danger. There are things about your birth that even Margaret doesn't know. Secrets I swore to take to my grave until I realized that my silence might cost you your life. David Morrison is not just obsessed with Elena, he's convinced that you are Elena, reborn through him to complete some twisted destiny he's been planning since high school. The marriage was never about love, sweetheart. It was about possession. Everything he's done for 30 years has been leading to this moment." The letter continued, with an address in Seattle and a name I didn't recognize, Dr. Rachel Martinez, a psychiatrist who had apparently been treating Elena for years and understood the full scope of David's psychological profile. "Dr. Martinez has been helping Elena prepare for the day when David would finally make his move. She has evidence, documentation, everything you'll need to prove what he's done to other women and what he plans to do to you. But be careful, darling. David has connections throughout the legal system, and he's very good at making problems disappear." I read the letter 3 times before burning it in our bathroom sink, watching Rose's final warning dissolve into ash and smoke that I washed down the drain. Then I called in sick to work, told David I was going shopping with friends, and drove to the airport for a flight to Seattle that I booked using a credit card he couldn't monitor. Dr. Martinez's office was in a nondescript building near the University of Washington, the kind of place where confidentiality was paramount and questions weren't asked about patients who needed to disappear at a moment's notice. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with kind eyes and a sort of calm competence that suggested she'd handled dangerous situations before. "Elena told me you might contact me," she said as we settled in her office. "She's been preparing for this conversation for years, hoping it would never be necessary but knowing it probably would be." "Is she safe?" I asked immediately. "David knows she's in Portland. He broke into her apartment. She's not in Portland anymore," Dr. Martinez said gently. "When Elena called me after speaking with you, I activated protocols we've had in place for years. She's somewhere safe now, somewhere David can't find her, but she's terrified about what might happen to you." The psychiatrist pulled out a thick file that contained what looked like decades of documentation. "Your husband has been my patient as well, though he doesn't know I'm treating him. For the past 15 years, I've been building a psychological profile based on his behavior patterns and the testimony of his surviving victims. Surviving victims? There have been 7 women over the years who caught David's attention because of their resemblance to Elena. 3 of them are dead apparent suicides that I believe were actually murders. 2 others disappeared completely and have never been found. The remaining 2 came to me after escaping situations that could have been fatal. Dr. Martinez opened the file and showed me photographs that made my blood run cold. All 7 women looked like me, same dark hair, same facial structure, same general build. But it was their expressions that haunted me. The hollow eyes of trauma victims, the careful way they held themselves as if expecting attack at any moment. David has a pattern, Dr. Martinez explained. He identifies vulnerable women who remind him of Elena, insinuates himself into their lives, and gradually isolates them from family and friends. He's charming at first, attentive, seemingly perfect. But once he has them under his control, the psychological torture begins. What kind of torture? Mind games designed to make them believe they're losing their sanity. Gaslighting, manipulation, systematic destruction of their self-worth. He wants them to become completely dependent on him, to have no identity outside of what he provides. And when they inevitably disappoint him, when they prove they're not actually Elena, he disposes of them. I thought about my own relationship with David, how quickly we'd moved from dating to marriage, how subtly he discouraged my friendships and pulled me away from my family. I thought it was romantic that he wanted to spend so much time together, that he was so attentive to my needs and preferences. But I'm different, I said slowly. I'm not a substitute for Elena. I'm actually her daughter. Dr. Martinez nodded grimly, which makes you infinitely more valuable to him and infinitely more dangerous to yourself. In David's mind, you're not just a replacement for Elena, you're the culmination of his 30-year obsession. You're Elena's genetic legacy, carrying her DNA, but shaped by his influence. To him, marrying you represents the ultimate victory. And when I disappoint him, when I prove I'm not who he wants me to be, that's what Elena and I have been trying to prevent, Dr. Martinez said quietly. David's fantasy has been building for 3 decades. The reality of who you actually are will eventually shatter his illusion. And when that happens, his response will be catastrophic. She handed me a flash drive and a business card for a detective in the Seattle Police Department. Everything you need is on here: evidence of his crimes, testimony from survivors. Enough to put him away for life if we can get it to the right people without him destroying it first. What do I do? You disappear, Dr. Martinez said firmly. Tonight. Don't go home. Don't pack clothes. Don't tell anyone where you're going. Elena is waiting for you at a safe location where we can plan your next steps without David knowing where you are. But even as she spoke, my phone was buzzing with increasingly frantic texts from David, demanding to know where I was and when I'd be home. The hunt was accelerating, and I was running out of time to stay ahead of a predator who had been planning this endgame for longer than I'd been alive. I never made it to the safe house Elena had arranged. David was waiting in our driveway when I returned from Seattle, sitting on the front porch steps with the patient posture of a hunter who knew his prey had nowhere left to run. In the fading evening light, he looked exactly like the man I'd fallen in love with. But I could see the predator beneath the mask now, the cold calculation in his smile, the way his hands rested too casually on his knees as if he were restraining himself from reaching for me. "How was your shopping trip?" he asked pleasantly as I got out of my car. My purse containing Dr. Martinez's flash drive, feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "You didn't buy anything?" "Just window shopping," I lied, forcing my voice to remain steady even as every instinct screamed at me to run. Getting out of the house helped clear my head. David stood and walked toward me with the deliberate movements of someone who had been planning this moment for years. "Funny thing," he said, his voice still conversational but carrying an undertone that made my skin crawl. "I called the boutiques downtown to see if you'd mention what you were looking for. None of them remember seeing you today." The facade was crumbling now, the pretense of the concerned husband dissolving as his true nature emerged. I backed toward my car, but David positioned himself between me and the vehicle with practiced ease. "In fact," he continued, "your credit card shows a purchase at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. Parking fees. Interesting choice for a local shopping trip." "David, I can't explain." "I'm sure you can. he said, his smile never wavering even as his eyes went dead and cold. Why don't we go inside and discuss it? I've prepared something special for dinner, just like Elena used to make. The mention of my biological mother's name sent ice through my veins. He knew that I knew, and he was done pretending otherwise. But there was something else in his tone, a satisfaction that suggested this confrontation was exactly what he'd been hoping for. Actually, I should call Margaret, I said, pulling out my phone with hands that I willed to remain steady. She wanted to know how I was doing after yesterday. David's hand shot out faster than I could react, plucking the phone from my grasp with the smooth efficiency of someone who had disarmed women before. Margaret is fine, he said, examining my recent call history with interest, though she's resting comfortably at the moment. The words hit me like a physical blow. What did you do to her? Nothing permanent, David said, pocketing my phone. Yet, but her well-being depends entirely on how cooperative you are over the next few hours. Shall we go inside? I had no choice but to follow him into the house that had been my home for less than a year but now felt like a tomb. David locked the door behind us with deliberate ceremony, then guided me to the living room where he'd arranged 2 wine glasses and a bottle that I recognized from our wedding reception. Sit, he said, and the gentle word carried the unmistakable weight of a command. We have so much to discuss, and I want you to be comfortable. I perched on the edge of the sofa, every muscle coiled for flight, even though I knew escape was impossible. David poured 2 glasses of wine with the careful attention of a host at a dinner party, but I noticed he only drank from one of them. 31 years, he said conversationally, settling into the chair across from me. That's how long I've been planning this evening. Ever since Elena broke my heart in high school and made me realize that some things are worth waiting for. David, you're scaring me. Good, he said, his mask finally falling away completely. Fear is appropriate, but not necessary if you're smart about this. I've gone to considerable trouble to arrange our life together, Sophia. The job at the law firm that gave me access to family records, the carefully orchestrated meetings that led to our courtship. Even Rose's death, nothing has been left to chance. The room tilted sideways as his words sank in. You killed my grandmother? Rose was becoming a problem, David said matter-of-factly. She suspected I was getting close to finding Elena, and she was preparing to warn you about our family connection. A little digitalis in her evening tea, a few heart palpitations, and everyone assumed it was natural causes. Old women die of heart attacks every day. I lunged for the door, but David was faster, his hand closing around my wrist with bruising force as he pulled me back to the sofa. Sit down, darling. We're not finished talking. You're insane, I whispered, struggling against his grip. I'm in love, David corrected. I've been in love with Elena Whitmore since I was 17 years old, and when she ran away, she took part of my soul with her. But then I realized something wonderful. She'd left me a gift. She'd left me you. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a syringe filled with clear liquid. The first few years will be difficult while you adjust to your new life, but I'm patient. I've waited 3 decades to have Elena back, and now I have something even better, Elena's daughter, purified by my influence, shaped by my love. I'm not Elena, I said desperately. I'm not your teenage girlfriend. I'm a separate person with my own life, my own dreams. You're exactly who you're supposed to be, David said firmly, testing the syringe with professional efficiency. And after tonight, you'll understand that everything else, your job, your friends, even Margaret, was just temporary. Your real life begins now. But as he moved toward me with the syringe, I heard something that made my heart leap with desperate hope, the sound of sirens approaching, growing louder as they turned onto our street. Elena hadn't been waiting passively at a safe house. She'd been mobilizing the Allies doctor Martinez had mentioned, calling in debts and favors from people who understood exactly how dangerous David Morrison could be. David heard them too, his face contorting with rage as he realized his carefully laid plans were unraveling. You called them, he snarled. You ruined everything. No, I said, backing away as the sirens stopped outside our house. You ruined everything 30 years ago when you decided that love meant possession. The front door exploded inward as tactical officers flooded our living room, weapons drawn and voices shouting commands that David ignored as he lunged toward me with the syringe still clutched in his hand. The last thing I saw before the tranquilizer took effect was Elena's face appearing in our doorway, older than in the photographs, marked by years of fear and struggle, but unmistakably my mother's face looking at me with an expression of desperate love and relief. "I'm sorry," she whispered as darkness claimed me. "I'm so sorry it took me 30 years to save you." I woke up in a hospital bed 3 days later to find Elena sitting in the chair beside me, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup like a lifeline. In the morning light streaming through the window, I could see myself in her features, not just the physical resemblance, but something deeper, a strength that had survived decades of running, of fear, of loving someone from a distance while knowing that getting too close might destroy us both. "How do you feel?" she asked softly, her voice carrying the careful tone of someone who had been waiting for this moment while terrifying herself with all the ways it could go wrong. "Confused," I admitted, struggling to sit up against the pillows. "Angry, grateful. How's Margaret?" "She's fine. David drugged her with the same sedative he tried to use on you, but she's recovering at home. The doctors say there shouldn't be any lasting effects." Elena paused, studying my face with the intensity of someone memorizing details she might never see again. "She wants to see you, but she understands if you need time." Through the window, I could see news vans in the hospital parking lot. The story had broken nationally. Lawyer's decades-long stalking campaign ends in arrest. Husband revealed as father in shocking family secret. My entire life had become public property, dissected by strangers who would never understand the complexity of loving people who had both protected and betrayed me. "David?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. "In custody, Dr. Martinez's evidence, combined with what the police found in his home office, should be enough to put him away for life." They discovered detailed files on dozens of women, surveillance photos going back years, even recordings of conversations he'd had with Rose. Elena's voice hardened. "He'd been planning this for so long, keeping track of everyone connected to our family, waiting for the perfect moment to strike." I thought about our wedding day, how David had insisted on taking care of all the details himself, how he'd chosen the venue, the flowers, even my dress, all of it, probably designed to recreate some fantasy he'd been nursing since high school. The man I thought I married had never existed at all. What happens now? I asked. Elena set down her coffee cup and reached for my hand, her fingers trembling as they touched mine. "That depends on what you want, Sophia. I know I have no right to ask for a relationship after abandoning you as a baby. I know Margaret is your real mother in every way that matters. But if you're willing, I'd like the chance to know you, to tell you about your father, your real father, Uncle James." Elena nodded, tears starting to track down her cheeks. "James knows everything now. The police had to interview him as part of their investigation, and the whole story came out. He's devastated that he never had the courage to tell you himself, but he wants to try to build a relationship if you'll let him." I tried to imagine it sitting down with the man who had walked me down the aisle at my sham wedding, learning to see him as my father instead of my uncle. The idea was overwhelming, but not impossible. There had always been something special in the way he looked at me, a protectiveness that went beyond normal family affection. "And you?" I asked Elena. "What do you want?" "I want to know who you've become," she said simply. "I want to hear about your dreams, your fears, your favorite movies and foods and books. I want to learn whether you inherited my stubborn streak or James's gentle nature. I want to make up for 30 years of not being able to ask how your day was." She pulled out a small wrapped package from her purse. "I brought you something. I know it's not much, and it doesn't make up for all the birthdays I missed, but..." Inside was a silver locket, not expensive, but beautiful in its simplicity. When I opened it, I found 2 photos, one of Elena as a young woman, radiant with joy, and another of myself on my wedding day, looking happy in a way that I now knew had been built on lies. "I cut your picture out of the newspaper," Elena explained. "I know the day was ruined by what we learned about David, but you looked so beautiful, so happy. I wanted to remember that happiness, even if it was based on deception." I fastened the locket around my neck, feeling the weight of it like a promise. "I want to know you too," I said finally. "It's going to be complicated, and I can't promise it will be easy. I'm angry about the choices you made, even if I understand why you made them. But I want to try." Elena smiled through her tears, and I saw in her face the same hope I felt building in my own chest. "We have time," she said. "For the first time in 30 years, we have time." 6 months later, I was sitting in Dr. Martinez's office in Seattle, no longer as a crisis patient, but as someone learning to rebuild her life from the foundation up. David's trial was scheduled to begin in the fall, and I would have to testify about our marriage, our relationship, the systematic way he had manipulated everyone around me, but I was no longer alone. Elena had moved to Seattle to be close to me while maintaining the independence we both needed. Margaret visited frequently, our relationship evolving from mother-daughter to something more complex but equally loving. James and I were taking tentative steps toward understanding each other, building new memories to replace the ones tainted by secrecy. How are you feeling about the future? Dr. Martinez asked during our session. I thought about the question carefully. Hopeful, I said finally. For the first time in my life, I know who I really am and where I come from. The truth hurt, but it also set me free. Through the window of Dr. Martinez's office, I could see Elena waiting in the parking lot, reading a book while she waited to drive me to lunch. We were taking things slowly, learning to be family without the weight of secrets and lies between us. The past would always be complicated, marked by choices that couldn't be undone and pain that couldn't be erased. But the future was ours to write, and for the first time in 30 years, we were writing it together.